Okay, so welcome to the second part of week 6 of the From Linear to Circular program. So thank you so much to all of you for joining us. So far in the program, we've looked at circular economy in depth. We've looked at the basics. We've looked at fashion earlier this week. We've looked at plastics and cities last week. We've looked at design. We've looked at business models. But we've been saving the best for this Friday afternoon, which is looking at something that we all consume, which is food. And I'm delighted today to be joined by the person I call the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's premier expert on food, Emma Chow. Before I introduce Emma, I will be joined hopefully shortly by my co-host Monica, who's having a couple of slight technical difficulties. This is working from home. This is COVID-19 working. This is doing webinars, loads of webinars. We're bound to have these sort of things crop up, but we will get around it and we will get Monica looped into this conversation sooner rather than later. Quick reminder of the Zoom rules. We want you to post all non-question stuff, all chat, preferably chat that's only related to this webinar in the chat window. We want questions in the Q&A. Again, we want questions that are related, if possible, only to this webinar to help try and keep that as clear as possible. And we have a team of outstanding people working behind the scenes to pull through the best questions, the most relevant questions to be shared during the course of this session. Someone commenting on my mustache. Yeah, actually, I do have access to a shaver, even though I'm at home. So maybe I'll try and get that sorted and tidied up before the next time I see you all. One other final very quick thing that I'll just share on the admin side, which is always my favorite part of these sessions, is for those of you who are joining us who are new, take a note of this Slack link. I will share it again at the end of the session, but navigating to the Slack is just a great way to respond to our prompts. We also have a channel on there called Recorded Sessions where you can catch up on anything you've missed. It's a great place to engage with the rest of the community. So definitely take a look at that when you have time. But welcome, Emma. Emma is the lead of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's Food Initiative, which is our project on food, really. So no better person to talk about this topic with us. But Emma, I wanted to start by asking you, how did you get here? Not how did you get to where you're sitting right now, but indeed, how did you get to this place where you're hosting this? Well, you're our expert guest on this session.
Yeah. Well, like all of us on the call and probably all of us in the world, it's in many different moments, but I think a couple highly influential ones that stand out for me that led me here. One was several experiences volunteering on organic farms in different parts of Europe several years ago that really put me in touch with how we actually grow food and go beyond studying it and seeing it from afar, but actually being literally there farming and learning the basics and some of the biggest issues with today's food system. So that was one piece. And then later on, it was actually my first time in Cambodia, and I remember sitting in a tuk-tuk with my friend whose parents are farmers in Cambodia, and just looking at these heaps of organic waste on the side of the road from the street carts and asking my friend what would happen to those. And of course, it would sometimes be collected, sometimes not. Definitely not being treated in a circular way, but that really stuck with me, thinking about, okay, the way we grow food needs to be better, but also how can we actually be designing out waste and getting it back to the farms and fields.
So coming from places of real personal experience, I'm very pleased to say that Monica is on the line. Sorry about that, Monica. Great to have you with us. Monica is the Learning Innovation Manager here at the Foundation. That means she works primarily, well, her work means that she engages primarily with some of our core strategic partners on their learning journey with the circular economy. She's going to be the co-host for this session. Monica, I hear that you won a massive rock, paper, scissors competition because you were so desperate to be the co-host in this session because of your own personal passion for this topic. What is it about this topic that interests you so much?
Yeah, thank you. I'm delighted to be here co-hosting with you today. It is indeed a topic close to my heart. So 3 interests in that topic. Firstly, I guess just caring about food that is nutritious and healthy for my well-being, but also the well-being of the wider ecosystem that it grows within. And also we are really quite fortunate to be living just 5 minutes away from a biodynamic farm. And over the past 8 years that we've been living here, we were just able to see how this farm functions, and they actually do apply regenerative farming practices. And with my husband being more involved, more closely, just really being lucky to see, so how does that work, and also exploring more what are the consequences if it works in a more linear and industrial way. And and thirdly, which is the more sort of systemic perspective on that topic, which I find fascinating, is I read an article once which described the food system as the mother of all systemic problems. So I'm really looking forward to hear more from Emma today, and just generally in the conversation, see what unfolds here.
So we're going to be tackling the mother of all systemic problems. What I like about, I mean, like both of you have shared the fact that really food is something that impacts us quite personally. And actually, we want to kick the session off by asking you guys to think about, well, actually not food in this case, but drink. But anyway, same sector. So I'm going to launch a poll that asks you to how many cups of coffee have you had today? And actually, while we launch that poll, Emma, I'm going to share a photo that you shared with us just to show. So this is Emma. This what is this photo actually?
This is my coffee from this morning.
This was supposed to be something, right? This bit in the middle.
No. It's just abstract. It's all interpreted. You know.
What do you? Yeah. So maybe alongside the current poll, what do you guys see when you look at that photo? Tell us in the chat window. So the point of asking people about how many coffees they've had today, I guess, Emma, is that we all consume food and drink all the time.
It's true. I love things that are coming through the chat.
What have we got? We've got so a baby, iced coffee, not earth, farmers. Yeah, so actually that was even a better starting point. That I'm going to close the first poll now. So what we're seeing is I'm going to share the results. What we're seeing is that actually we haven't got a lot of coffee drinkers in the audience. So we've got 40% of people have had 0 coffees today. They might not enjoy the rest of this next couple of slides that we're going to share, the next couple of anecdotes. But we have got some people who are very much aligned with me. 11% of our audience who've had 3+ coffees. This is my 5th hot beverage of the day. So, why is that an interesting question to ask, Emma?
Well, wanted to ask that question to just use coffee as something that, well, some of us drink on a daily basis, but probably all of us are at least familiar with, just to kind of ground us and go through what would a cup of coffee look like in a circular economy for food, in this positive vision for a food system where people and nature and the economy is able to thrive long term. So that's what we want to spend a bit of time on today, and have some visuals that we'll be able to share just to go through this journey to really understand what does it mean to apply the principles of circular economy, right? Designing out waste and pollution, keeping materials and products in use, regenerating natural systems, which is particularly relevant when it comes to food. What does it actually look like to apply that in the food system? So we have some more polls. I think one just
launched a second poll. We might need some help with the terminology on this one, I think, in terms of shade grown coffee, not sure, and also sequester in relation to barrels of oil. Some people are jumping straight into it, so maybe they know, but anyone who's not clear about those terms, could you mind giving us
a couple notes that perhaps I can voice over, and we'll dive into more. So just take your best guess in the meantime. But shade grown is really thinking about a forest, right? You can grow basically a tree canopy forest area, and then have the lower kind of height of the coffee plants themselves lower down. So you've got the shade covering those plants beneath. And then sequestering is the action or ability to actually be able to draw carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere through the very photosynthesis and growing of plants themselves, coffee in this case, and then sticking that through the roots into the soil and locking that in when you have really healthy soil. So we'll talk more, but hopefully that was enough to give at least a bit of context.
And I've just remembered we do have this image that kind of shows a little bit of those three. Well, it shows what we mean by shade grown, I guess. I mean, I don't know if it's like, it's not a scientific illustration of it, but it's an infographic style illustration.
Yeah, it's pretty good. And you can see the comparison on the left, starting with just the natural forest ecosystem that we might encounter in different parts of the world. It might look a little bit different, but often coffee is grown in particular climates and more tropical environments. But linear production, as we call it, of coffee, which is linear in the sense that it's degrading, it's damaging to ecosystems and dependent on finite resources to grow it, is often the sun-grown coffee in the middle. So you see it's just coffee, nothing else. It's monocropping, and all sorts of inputs that you're not seeing on that visual are going into it that are unhealthy for the system. And then on the far right is the shade-grown coffee. There's also different practices that you might have heard of before, like agroforestry, agroecology, that are more technical terms that include things like shade-grown coffee and just having those layers. So you might have mango trees and different types of trees that are providing a nice canopy and shade for the coffee plants beneath, and much richer in diversity and habitat provision and taking care of the soil.
I'm going to end the poll so we can look at the results and see whether people's guess, or maybe some of them actually know the answer. Most people are going for the plumping for the middle of the road, 14 barrels of oil at 59%. And some people being even more optimistic and talking about 40 barrels of oil. What's the answer?
Well, you guys got it. It's 14. 14 barrels of oil is the equivalent of the carbon emissions that can be sequestered per hectare per year.
So
shade grown.
So what you're saying with that is that the way in which coffee is grown in the system that you just described, not only does it provide us with coffee, it still provide us with the drink that some of us love. Many people actually haven't had a coffee today, but those of us who love coffee, whilst also contributing to mitigating against the effects of climate change.
Yeah. So you think about what are these ecosystem services that can be gained when we're using food production practices that are actually working with nature rather than against it.
Great. Well, that sounds like a
win-win.
But
it's not just about, and Emma, it's not just about the farming practices. How much of the actual crop is being used?
Well, this is where things get quite interesting. So coffee has a coffee cherry, as it's called, which is actually the fruit. I think we have a slide on it.
Yes, let me show our audience what a coffee cherry is. A term that some of us, well, me included, do not know what it is, what we mean by that.
But they're very beautiful, right? And if you're in a cafe, and often that we could spend our whole life, and that's the only way we interact with coffee is growing it, buying at the grocery store or in cafes. We often don't see way at the farm level when it's growing what coffee looks like. And this is the cherry. So this is the fruit, and the bean that ultimately gets roasted and ground up, and then water filters through to create the drink of coffee. That's actually the fruit behind it. So we don't eat that fruit. We don't consume that fruit. So that's actually a very high volume. But I'm not going to give away what the answer is, because I want you to guess how much of that coffee cherry actually goes into that end cup of coffee. Is it 0.2%, 2%, or 20%?
Okay, so we've pretty much got to the end of the poll. So it was when you guys, we obviously talked about this before we went live. When you guys said coffee cherry, I was like, do you mean coffee bean? So it's interesting to learn fun facts. Let's close this poll and share the results. So we've got pretty well split, 31% on 0.2%. Most people plumping for 2% of it being used, which, you know, and a few more optimistic people saying 20%. What's the magic number?
It's 0.2%. So 30%, 31% of you got it right. Well done. Well done. So of course, when we think about, so we just talked about the production, growing food, growing coffee in this case, in a way that's regenerative. Then still at that production stage, we're doing some processing of the coffee to get those, get the cherry kind of taken away, separate it, and that could become waste. But as we apply circular economy principles, we'd of course put in solutions to make sure that it never goes to waste, because it can be used for valuable products. And often the best case or the best use at the farm level is actually to go back into the soil as part of compost or biofertilizer, and really be cycling right there, and really design out the need for external inputs, synthetic fertilizers, externally provided compost even.
And I've just flagged up a visual that I think so when we talk about how do we make the most of that coffee cherry, this is one illustration of well, you might have the beans for coffee, but you might also do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, because especially when we move along this coffee journey from the farm where we just were to the actual roasting stage, where a bit more byproduct is generated, and then also the coffee grounds, of course. All of those are byproducts. They're not waste, and they contain valuable organic material and also nutrients. So you see that with coffee, we can create these cascades of value, as we may refer to them. We can create things like actually flour that contains nutrients that are good for us as humans to be consuming. And Café Bueno out of Denmark is one example, where they have systems to be taking those coffee grounds and actually making another ingredient to go back into making new food, which is quite cool. Also for creating healthy soils, which I spoke about a few moments ago at the farm level. And then also with something like coffee grounds, actually using that as the medium to be growing things like mushrooms. So again, helping to grow more food in a regenerative way, really designing out the need for synthetic finite resource inputs. And then even thinking beyond the food and agriculture space, food byproducts, and in this case, coffee, can also be used to really strengthen and feed into a broader bioeconomy. So there's all sorts of things that could be made from it, but here on the slide, we're featuring something like a textile. So EcoAlf actually is able to use the coffee byproducts to create textiles. And of course, in a circular economy, something like a jacket would also by design be designed to be recyclable as well and continue circulating. We don't just want to make things from what otherwise would be waste and call that circular. We're really designing for the full system here.
And Emma, we're just getting a question in. Kevin is asking, how do we decouple unsustainable fossil fuel energy inputs into agriculture?
Yeah, so that's really one of the biggest benefits of shifting to regenerative, because shifting to regenerative is indeed redesigning the farm level. What we're growing, shifting from monocrops to multi-crops. And when you start making these transitions, the systems themselves are, again, able to tap into the inherent regenerative nature of ecosystems and really take care of itself, have those nutrients cycling as they naturally would, so that we don't need to be creating these fossil fuel based inputs. And also we're doing less activities like tilling, etc., that is often dependent currently on machines that again are burning fossil fuel to run.
So I'm just flagging this image up again, Emma, because I think what you're saying in some ways is if you look at the natural forest ecosystem, which is very similar to the shade grown coffee system, this natural grown ecosystem doesn't actually require fossil fuel inputs. Like we don't, right. That isn't grown or like harvested using fossil fuels. The one in the middle, that is that system is maintained by lots of different inputs, such as some of the ones you just mentioned. So the closer we can get to the one on the left, the less fossil fuels we need.
Yeah, and what's amazing with food, because it is part of nature, right? It's what connects us with nature every day. Nature, if we get right and we're truly regenerative, we're actually able to help mitigate climate change by being carbon positive and pulling down that carbon and locking it into the soils, but also help farmers be more adaptive and resilient to climate change shocks. So again, healthy soils, diverse ecosystems at the farm level can help with adapting to floods and instances of droughts as well.
Mm-hmm. And thinking beyond coffee now, how would you characterize a healthy food system?
Yeah, so ultimately, right, a healthy food system that's really going to work for us long term, it needs to be able to provide everyone with healthy, nutritious food every day, but also work for natural systems and ecosystems, and be able to allow businesses of all sizes and varieties to thrive too. So I think diversity is a really important word when it comes to food systems, because it's diversity at the ecosystem level, it's diversity of what we're eating and species, but it's also diversity of the systems themselves and the types of companies, the types of distributed ways that we're getting our food.
And I mean, in the opening, Mo described food as the mother of all systemic problems. There's lots of research, there's lots of work that highlights how challenging the food system is to fix. Some of the things that we've already talked about as we move away from coffee are things that have been talked about for quite a long time. You know, in some ways, what makes our work, what makes our work, in your view, distinct or significant in this space of like loads of people being aware that food is a challenging system to fix and get right?
Yeah, there's definitely been, especially in the past couple years, recent years, a robust evidence-based building around what are the challenges, what makes the food system the mother of all problems, that Monica alluded to. And actually, I came on board with the foundation when we were just diving into our own research to really understand what makes today's system at the global level so linear, and what is the true power and potential of applying circular economy principles. And something that we found in our research is that for every $1 we're spending on food globally, there's about $2 worth of costs. Now, half of those costs have been fairly well understood to date, and it's really related to consumption issues. So things like hunger, micronutrient deficiency, obesity. But the other half of the cost, so equal to that first bucket, is actually related to how we grow food and how we manage waste and byproducts. So that second half of the cost is where circular economy principles can directly be applied to be designing solutions that address those health, economic, and environmental losses that we're experiencing in today's system. And we know that cities have a big role to play as well, and that's one of our distinctive angles. We found in our work that 80% of the world's food is destined to be eaten in cities by 2050. So they have this incredible demand power. But today they're really these endpoints of a linear system. They're like these black holes sucking in resources, including lots of food, and even more so as we think of urbanization rapidly speeding up. But what if cities could actually use that to their advantage and transform their role, so that they're taking actions, they're using that demand power, teaming it with the fact that cities are also hubs of people, of innovation, of ideas, to be stimulating and creating positive impact in their own spaces and making more livable, better cities for people living in them, plus send this ripple effect all the way out to the farms that may be near or far away, who are producing a lot of the food that will flow into cities. I see you've brought up our beautiful graphic. Do you want me to talk through this in terms of what cities can do?
Yeah, and it would be also interesting to hear what cities are also involved once you started telling us a little bit more about how this works on your visual.
Yeah. So again, there's lots of stuff that cities can do, but what we tried to do is create these 3 ambition areas. where cities can focus action, again, based on circular economy principles. So one of them is saying, okay, if 80% of the world's food is going to be eaten in cities by 2050, what if cities actually use their demand power to source food that's grown in ways that are regenerative, ways that support natural systems? And what if they're able to bring production closer to consumption where it makes sense? What if they're able to design out that concept of waste altogether by making the most of food? And the role of design and marketing healthier food products, which I'll hold on going into depth there. But we found that if cities around the world take action at scale within these three ambition areas, we can expect by 2050 about $2.7 trillion worth of economic, health, and environmental benefits. So with that, packaged up in a report that we published called Cities and Circular Economy for Food at World Economic Forum in 2019, we then transitioned to really mobilizing this vision, going from building the evidence base, painting this high-level vision, to putting it on the ground and mobilizing and showing that it can be done, and this demonstration with pioneering actors. So with that, we are working with a few cities that we call flagship cities, and it's London, Sao Paulo, and New York, who we're working with very closely, both with the government agencies there and also relevant stakeholders who are all responsible for having a role in shaping those urban food systems and environments.
I wanted to jump in with a quick cue about that. So you're working with those three cities. Cities is kind of like an interesting starting point or an interesting lens of which you've explained why. Are you saying that there's kind of things that are globally applicable to all cities, or is actually the work in those, for example, those three you mentioned, really quite distinct? Is it very context specific, or is it very globally applicable?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and really why we were motivated to work at the local level as well as the global level on this project. Because with food isn't like any material stream, right? We tend to not even talk about it as material stream because food is so entrenched in culture and identity and distinct to what can be grown in certain areas. So therefore, we can create this blueprint, this visual that you're seeing, but how that gets translated on the ground looks very different from place to place. And we have a sense of how it could look different, but that's also some of the key learnings that we want to gain from this experience, to say, okay, what does sourcing food grown regeneratively, how does that actually play out in Sao Paulo, in New York, in London? What role does public procurement have in these different places based on their governance structure? What is there even farming in the region, or is it coming from far away? What does local mean? What's the most valuable way, or options rather? What's those menu of options of turning what are today organic waste streams into value? Because what's most valuable for one city may be different for another city, again, based on the context.
Thanks, Emma. And just bringing in some more questions that come from the audience. One on which is on scaling. Are there any examples of circular economy food productions that have grown into scale to supplement traditional food production? And can it compete in the current economic system?
Yeah, so if I caught that correctly, it's a question around what are some examples of at scale, large scale regenerative food production that's supplemented with...
Yeah, that's how I understand it.
Yeah, it's actually, there's been a lot of movement, especially from food manufacturing companies, really in the past couple of years, starting to take steps to shift existing production, which may be largely conventional, to more regenerative. So we see companies, for instance, like General Mills in the US, that's made bold commitments around 1 million acres being shifted to regenerative. I think it's by 2030. So they're taking a collaborative approach with organizations like the Nature Conservancy to actually start looking at oat farmers who are supplying some of the oats for their Quaker Oats brand, to be looking at how do you take those steps and getting the knowledge and training to those farmers. And we also see Danone, who we work with quite closely. They've done some really leading work in terms of how they're working directly with some of their dairy farmers, again, largely in the US, to be shifting and creating incentive structures and really the relationships that are underpinning all of this to move towards regenerative. So we are seeing a lot of these global companies who are responsible for a big chunk of the food that people are eating every day around the world, starting to really understand what does it mean and what do they need to do to shift at scale their production. Because at the end of the day, when you think about a thriving business long term, you need to be taking care of the soil, because the soil is the battery. If we run that dry, you won't be able to grow more food if you're killing the soil. So it's moved into very much a core business agenda item, and happens to generate these additional co-benefits around climate change impacts, around biodiversity, and be helping to move with shifting consumer attitudes too.
Thanks for that, Emma. And some big company names you've dropped in there. So it's I mean, it's interesting to think that, in some ways it's kind of regenerative agriculture is kind of a going back to a different way of farming and upgrading it, and obviously seeing the mention of very large organizations being engaged with that is interesting.
But I want to catch you on something there, because I think this is a misconception. Some people will say regenerative or even organic, right? It's like going back. We're going back to old ways of farming. And what we really need to think about is, how do we use, for instance, and we are seeing an example of this, it's quite amazing, innovative applications of digital technologies, for instance, to enable more like the characteristics of old ways of farming that were inherently regenerative, when we didn't even have synthetic fertilizers, when we didn't have agrochemicals, and taking those learnings and thinking about how do we apply them in more innovative ways and do it faster, thanks to technical and digital enablement and knowledge proliferation, thanks to that as well. Because that's a lot of this in the transition. It's not just a technical piece, but like, actually, what are the practices? How do you actually grow the crops? Because it's a whole different way of farming and takes a deep knowledge-based transition.
And I like that, because I like that your catch there, because we, in the old days, we didn't used to have to feed 10 billion people. So thinking about this as just going back to doing something we used to do is clearly not the answer. We need innovative new methodologies. I wanted to pick up on something you said earlier, Emma, because the cities angle makes us kind of distinct. But you also, in your graphic, you had this expression, design and market healthier food products. And we don't really think about food being designed specifically. And well, certainly I didn't, until I was confronted with this idea. What do we mean by that, and why is that so important?
Yeah, so when we think about food design, for me, I like to think about, well, first of all, recognize that so much of the food that is available in restaurants, in grocery stores, in eateries, has been designed in the sense of someone, or many people in some cases, have made decisions on my behalf from those raw primary ingredients at the farm level into the final product that I get to choose from, right? So it's not that different from how clothing is designed, right? People have made decisions on the style, the look, all of that. For food, it's a bit different, because it's, what are the ingredients? Where's it coming from? What's happening to the waste? So we even see that as the most ultimate upstream stage, and recognizing that because so much of the food nowadays has been designed, that we need to bring this design perspective if we're going to get it right. It can't just be about optimizing sourcing, but actually about fundamentally redesigning food products, dishes, menus to be maximizing benefit for the end eater who's enjoying it, because it also needs to be delicious and good for you, but also good for the broader system. So yeah, that's my little overview on design. Hopefully that's clear, because it is for sure a new concept, especially circular design for food.
And and this brand is probably quite familiar to many of us. So a brand that was quite successful in attracting buyers, and I'm also just relating to the some of the big corporates you mentioned, like Danone you're working with, or some of the others like Unilever, etc. A question that has come up from Elsa. Is there some sort of methodology to assess the circularity of some of these food systems, and how do you work with the companies around finding a methodology that you from the food team consider like a good approach, and to be able to also realize that on scale?
Yeah, no, really great questions, because approaching it is definitely challenging, but we have been putting thinking into it. And I do, of course, want to mention that Foundation did launch earlier this year Circulytics, which indeed food and beverage companies and agriculture companies have been completing. And that's really looking at it at a company level. How do you judge where they're at in their circular economy journey and assess where they're at and track progress over time? But then something that we're working on at the moment and should have released in the public sphere in the coming months is for a city scale, an urban food system, can we measure where that space is at in their circular economy journey? So we're currently developing, really aiming at city governments as the audience, but this kind of questionnaire or quiz to help a city government official be able to assess, based on current activities and flows of food, where they're at on their journey. So it is the full system perspective. I think that's really important. I think with food, it can be challenging because it is so complex, but what's really important is that we don't silo things out, and we come up with tools and frameworks, abilities to maintain that, kind of lean into the complexity and maintain that full system view when we come to measuring and assessing.
I wanted to jump back to this Oatly picture, Emma. Why is I say I want to jump back to it, whilst I navigate my way back to it, why is that, in your view, a kind of example of food design?
Yes, I think it's a great example of food design and marketing, actually. And it's not just Oatly, but all plant-based milks, right? We think about a couple decades ago, alternative milks, as some people might refer to them as, or the industry might be referred to as, it was really just for the segment of customers who have an allergy often, right? And it's tucked away on the shelves of health food stores or certain sections of the grocery store. And then companies came along like Oatly, who, yes, applied the design angle and created these products, but it's quite a simple product when you think about it, right? It's water and oats. But the branding and marketing has been instrumental in their success, because they decided that from the outset, they were going to aim at millennials. They were going to do these kind of guerrilla marketing. You see an image like this, which I can't remember exactly where it's from, but it looks like a city in Europe.
Quite a trendy place by the looks of it.
I know they did this in London. Actually, they've done a recent campaign in London like this in all the tube stations. But it catches people's eye, right? Not all food advertising looks like this, let alone a plant-based milk. So their approach to getting in people's faces, having attractive branding, like building a aspirational brand around it, has, I think, led to this huge momentum, to the point that the plant-based milk industry in 2018 was valued at $16 billion globally. And Oatly alone has seen shortages of milk in places like London and New York, where you're almost always going to walk into a cafe and oat milk is an option there.
Yeah, it looks like this is from Berlin. I also see Hafer, which is the German word for oat. So it's, but just another question that has come in, and I think is relevant to here, is because we have dropped quite a lot of big names, and we tend to refer to the work we do with our global partners, and names like Danone, Unilever come up, but Oatly is also successful, probably quite established brand by now. So is there anything that you could say about the question that was raised here by Karen, in order to bring food production closer to consumers, shouldn't we be helping small independent producers? And maybe some of them have the more circular approaches we want to nurture and help flourish.
Yes, I love this question because it comes back to a couple points. One of them, when I was emphasizing diversity and diversity of production, and especially when you think of local, I think this is particularly relevant, or rather being highlighted in today's circumstances all around the world with the impacts of COVID-19. And this notion or realization that we are seeing in many places in the world, especially cities and urban environments that are really feeling the stress of all of this, is the need for regionally connected, regionalized food systems. Now that we need to get the balance right too, because when we talk about diversity, you don't want to source everything hyper local, because then you're also vulnerable. What if a storm comes through or something happens, then you're wiped out. But you also don't want everything from far away global, because what happens when borders close? And then you also have nothing. So you need to get that right. And by getting it right, you need to be connecting with those and supporting those smaller scale farmers in the areas, for instance, around cities. Something that we found in our work is that the peri-urban area, which is about 20-kilometer radius around cities, kind of that donut around city boundaries, that 20-kilometer peri-urban area, if we draw those circles around cities around the world, it's about 40% of the world's existing cropland, irrigated cropland, is in those areas. So there's a significant chunk of food production already happening in those zones. How do we rewire the logic of these food flows so that what we're growing already in those areas, how do we make it so that it's more regenerative, and that's actually food types that are being eaten in the cities, in the hubs of where people are nearby? And those connection points you're actually seeing in this time of crisis, that almost by necessity and this desire to support local economies and the farmers who are on our doorsteps, all of a sudden there's this surge in demand beyond what the supply can even satisfy. And there's a clear need to truly redesign for resilience and circular economy principles in this way of thinking, and thinking about how can, again, coming to the cities, how can cities use their demand power to be supporting these farmers who are in the region, and then also turning their waste streams actually into value that is compost, biofertilizers, agriculture inputs to go right back out to those farms and create these really reinforcing positive relationships between city and countryside, rather than it being cities draining the rural areas.
We've had a lot of questions in. Thank you everyone who's been posting those questions. Really, Emma, I see the next sort of 10 to 15 minutes of just us throwing a load of questions in from our audience at you, and trusting that you won't, you're basically trapped here with us for the next 10 minutes because you've committed time. So let's get into some of these topics that have been coming in. One, I should say we had some questions that came in beforehand as well, so I'm going to mention a couple of those. One quite juicy topic, possibly. It's come up a couple of times in the comments. I think there's a couple of Q&A questions in it. Katie sent it in beforehand as well. She mentions the impact of meat and animal production on the environment. It's a huge topic, it's everywhere. And she asks about diets. Would it be easier to achieve a circular economy in a food system through a vegan diet, a vegetarian diet, or a diet that contains meat? Where do we stand on that?
Yeah, great question. Really glad you brought this up, because I don't have any slides to support this today, but I'll talk through it and hopefully it's clear and makes sense. But basically, when we talk about these integrated regenerative systems, livestock is a part of that, right? Livestock can be a part of it. Now, today, most livestock and animal-based ingredients that are in the food we eat is raised in industrial linear practices. Minimal, less than 10%, is actually grown in regenerative ways. Now, what do regenerative ways of producing livestock, what does that actually look like? Some things like managed grazing, which is actually by the way of managing and moving around herds of cattle through fields. You can actually be sequestering more carbon into the soil than is being emitted through the equivalent of the methane production, etc. So we do have programs, and not we, but we see programs, even in places like California, where there's projects that are integrated into the carbon trading system and the state's climate change work that's working with the ranchers to be doing managed grazing. So that is really part of a regenerative system. Likewise, we see things in Asia like duck rice farming, which is a practice of actually having ducks integrated with the rice paddies, and the ducks, through their very movement through the rice paddies, are taking care of the soil, and also, of course, they're helping fertilize it. So again, there's these integrated ways of regeneration through the nutrient cycling, which again happens in nature. There's livestock in nature when untouched. We've simply, as humans, intervened and created these systems to grow an abundance or produce an abundance of meat and livestock in what are harmful and damaging ways that aren't working with nature. So we know that we need to move towards less but better meat and animal-based products. And regardless of whether it's a soy milk or a regular milk, we'd say that in this ultimate vision, it would all be coming from part of a regenerative system.
Emma, just another question that one of the participants has sent through prior to this webinar on a Slack channel, which is what's the best approach to prioritize circular initiatives within a food chain production? And how can we make the best decisions, not just because they're circular, but because they're also sustainable and result in the highest value?
Well, I would say that they're one for me. They're all integrated. You know, even thinking about sustainability, value, circular. I'm not sure if the intent of using the word circular was really from like a circulating nutrients and material streams. But when I think of circular, I'm thinking all circular economy principles.
Yeah, maybe it's a question more about prioritization in a food value chain. If in my interpretation, if I was the mayor of a city, and you know, I might not be now speaking to Emma Chow, who would perfectly be able to like guide me, but I'm trying to make sense. Like, where's the best starting point for me in that food chain that I'm experiencing in my city? Or even in a regional, you know, in a town. It doesn't always have to be a city. We mentioned cities quite a lot, but how can I prioritize where to start to take action?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of mapping out what those scenarios of action could be, whether it's one or like a bigger scale project, and trying to estimate what the benefits are. And I think every organization, what we're learning, every organization has its own set of criteria or priorities that they'll select against. For instance, if the climate agenda is top of mind for them, that might be the biggest impact area that they will choose to prioritize. Whereas another might be on designing out waste streams. And again, we have some good reference materials on our website that includes, it was designed for cities to basically be able to calculate some of these estimates, but it still provides data or kind of like ability to calculate for companies or organizations. And we're looking at how we can more effectively provide these types of tools for in a public way for all organizations to do that very process, because it is challenging.
We're fast running out of time, Emma, unfortunately, but there are a couple big topics we still want to get your viewpoint on. So I'm going to throw one at you. Which is alternative proteins. Few comments and questions coming in. I think there may have been one in beforehand as well. In say 60 to 90 seconds, are they good or bad? Do we want more of them? What are the challenges? Where do they fit in?
Yeah, so building off of the question around meat, and is meat part of this vision, what I'll reinforce from that is, again, in today's system, because so much of the meat and animal proteins being produced are so damaging, alternative proteins are helping to diversify where we're getting our protein sources and rely a bit less, at least, on the animal proteins. Now, what we need to keep in mind, big picture, long term, and make sure that we avoid having something with good intentions, but then negative consequences, is knowing that we need to be aiming for all ingredients, no matter what, to be regenerative. So that's alternative doesn't always mean better, right? When we think about knowing that dairy can be produced as part of a regenerative system, a cup of that milk might actually be better than soy milk that's contributing to massive deforestation if it's produced in a certain way. But likewise, soy milk could be produced in a regenerative way. So it's really understanding the journey, kind of like if we went through that coffee journey, understanding the journey of that food beforehand.
I'm gonna throw.
Yeah, just there. So Seb and I were just debating whether we are going to takeaways, whether we throw in more questions. So I think we're in for another question for you. So what role does vertical farming play in all of this?
Yeah, good question. We did, and you'll see in our report, there is a chunk of analysis. We actually did quite a few months of analysis on the role of urban food production and this question of, can cities even feed themselves, as part of our analysis. So do check out the report for all the details. But what I can say briefly is that urban farming, vertical urban farming, has a role to play. You know, it's a piece of the puzzle. It's definitely not a silver bullet and the answer to everything. It's most suitable for certain types of foods, mostly leafy greens, some fruits, a couple other vegetables. So it can't satisfy everything that we need to eat from a nutrition standpoint. And importantly, something to keep in mind is there's a distinction between perhaps circular and circulating nutrients, water, which you can optimize, or that's what you should be optimizing for in these closed systems for food production, like vertical farming, but it's not embedded in nature. It's not like a soil-based production that can actually be regenerating the natural system and the ecosystem around it.
Nice. Well, I've got one last question, Emma, and then I'll let Mo ask one last question. We're squeezing all our time with you. The Monday question this week, we asked this group of our participants a question every Monday. We want their sort of views on it. We've been asking them about biomimicry, or what circular economy takes from biomimicry, or what debt it owes to biomimicry. We've had loads of great responses. Thank you so much to everyone who's participated in that. What debt does the food initiative, from a circular perspective, kind of owe to biomimicry, or the vision, I suppose?
Yeah. Wow, great. We could go into another whole hour on this. No, I think a lot. I do think a lot. I think these past couple of years have really been challenging and stretched our own thinking, really diving into the whole biological side of the butterfly, right? And starting to understand, well, maybe how do we think about things on a technical side that simply don't apply, or apply in such a different way on the biological side. And I think whether it's implicitly or explicitly, we're often referencing those kind of philosophical undertones of biomimicry and how we design. I often use this line of like how we actually design the whole food system to be regenerative, and looking at nature, and nature untouched is like the wisest kind of Bible of how to design regenerative systems. So keeping that in mind, like waste doesn't exist in nature. Okay, what does that actually look like at a regional food system scale, and even a food product, referencing nature when you're designing that.
Okay, I think we're coming to an end with 3 minutes to go and a couple of announcements at the end. So Emma, what would you say? We covered so much, and there's a lot to get excited about and learn from. But if you were to summarize the most important takeaways, what would you say to our listeners?
Yeah, I realize it's a lot and it's quite complicated. So do check out our website, because we do have a really good, in-depth report that really spells out all those areas I spoke through today to check out, and some really good case studies too, some concrete examples. Again, some of them I mentioned. some diff sessions as well on our site that cover the food topic over the past couple of years. But then I want to make sure that I mention our upcoming workshop that will be having public sessions online. It's called the Big Food Workshop, hosted by EMF. That will take place June 15th to 17th. So we'll have to make sure that you guys all get the registration link, because we have some great speakers, and there'll be one session where you can learn about what we're doing on the food initiative, a couple interactive sessions where we'll want to hear from you and engage in these virtual communities, and then a lineup of some really inspiring speakers who are putting circular economy into action for better food systems.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Emma. And yes, we will circulate the link to Big Food Workshop in the Slack channel. And just on, Emma mentioned diff sessions there, and I feel like maybe I should just mention diff is what we used to have this program called diff, which is now basically just the foundation just broadcasts loads of content live on our YouTube channel. So there's videos of interviews and sessions with experts, including, I think, Emma and a couple, where we've dived deeply into this topic and from various angles. So check all those out on our website. And yeah, thank you very much for that. And actually, we were also on Tuesday, people may have seen that we did our first kind of Explore the Circular Economy weekly show on the foundation, on the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's YouTube channel. So if you've enjoyed watching Emma here, she is also back live with us at 12 o'clock BST on Tuesday, and we're talking about real life examples of much of what we've been talking about today in action again. So to get even more food biological content, circular economy content, tune in at 12 p.m. on Tuesday. Couple of very quick closing announcements from me. We mentioned the Slack community. If you're new, definitely get on there. That's where all the recordings are. That's where the slides will be shared. I'm not sure if I've been asked about slides yet, but we will share slides there. Next week, we're back to only one webinar a week. I'm sure many of you will be absolutely gutted to hear that we've only got one webinar next week. But we're looking even more in depth at how do we measure circular economy in action, and in particular, a tool that the foundation launched at the beginning of the year. We are also on the point about Slack, we've been asked by a few people, is it going to close after 10 weeks? We definitely won't close it literally at the 10-week mark. We will keep it open for a time after that so that you can continue to absorb the content and the community. And obviously we have our LinkedIn community, which will definitely, is a LinkedIn group. So it'll be last for a long time. Homework. So get back in your trios. Reflect on this webinar. We'd love you to provide a very brief summary of your reflection in the channels for the benefit of people who haven't attended both webinars. So a good place to kind of share what were your 2 or 3 key takeaways. We've heard Emma's, what were yours? Apart from that, we will see you. So share those in the week 6 channel on Slack. We will see you next week. Thank you very much to Emma, and thank you very much to Monica.